Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston, and today we're taking a look at Genesis chapter 26. So remember, we've seen God. We've seen He's created the world. He's created humanity, and humanity has rebelled against Him, which, is synonymous with death because God is the source of all life, right? But God is on this rescue plan, this redemption plan to recover humanity, bring it back into relationship with Him, and restore the whole creation while doing so. And He has chosen a specific vessel in the man of Abraham. He's called him out to follow Him and to trust Him. And He said, I'll reveal myself to you and I'll make you a blessing. And in that way, I will bless all the nations around you. What He's saying is, I'm going to pick you, your descendants. Through your descendants, I'm going to bring about the restoration of humanity. But Abraham has died. Abraham has passed away. And so his children are going to pick up that torch, pick up the responsibility of that covenant and that promise in order to bless the rest of creation. And that's going to fall to Isaac, who was God's promised son from the barren Sarah. And even though we saw Abraham at the end of his life being ultimately faithful, Isaac, unfortunately, is not going to pick up exactly where he left off, right? He's got to go on his own journey of discovering God and being called by God, right? No kid can pick up exactly where their parent leaves off. They're kind of doomed a little bit to make the same mistakes as their parents when they're first learning how to be independent and learning how to be adults. And those commercials from Progressive about young people becoming their parents, right? It's so true, and it's biblical even, right? We're going to see that in Genesis chapter 26. Isaac is going to replay a lot of the beats of the story of his father Abraham. And so what this story is going to teach us about is, the lingering effects of blessing over generations and the lingering effects of sin and trauma and lies over generations, right? So let's look and see how everything Abraham did, let's see how it impacts Isaac going forward. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. The Lord appeared to him and said, Do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and to your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. So right away we get a repeat and even an explicit reminder of what happened back in chapter 12 when there was a famine and Abraham ran away to Egypt. Isaac is called to the same calling Abraham is called to. Trust me, follow me is what God says to him. But because of Abraham's failure, Isaac has another clause in there which says, hey, don't go to Egypt, right? Remember what happened when Abraham did flee to Egypt. He told Pharaoh Sarah was his sister, and Pharaoh took Sarah and almost ruined God's whole plan for restoration. It was only by God's direct intervention that Sarah was returned to Abraham. So Isaac is given the same test with explicit instruction from God not to repeat his father's behavior. But let's see what happens. God continues telling Isaac, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and will give your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So God reminds Isaac what's at stake. All of the promises that were promised to Abraham are dependent on Isaac's obedience now. It's not because anything Isaac has done, right? It's because of Abraham's obedience that he's getting to inherit this blessing and this responsibility to carry on that blessing to all the families of the earth. When we put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ, God sees all of our unrighteousness, all of our unworthiness to receive this blessing. And He says, because of Jesus' righteousness, I'm going to give you this blessing. So Isaac lived in Gerar. When the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, She is my sister. For he was afraid to say my wife, thinking the men of this place might kill me on account of Rebekah, for she is beautiful. Right, so Isaac doesn't go to Egypt, but he still commits the exact same sin that his father committed twice, right? And it's a reminder to parents that kids often end up acting just like their parents, right? I mean, just think about how you act like your mom or your dad, And sometimes we might not want to, right? My sister calls my dad, myself, and my little brother past, present, and future because we're so much alike each other. Actually, my family was just visiting me and my wife a few weekends ago, And I asked my wife at one point, I said, what's it like dealing with 5 of me? She was like, it's 5 times as hard, right? And again, the Bible has already introduced this concept. Remember all the way back in chapter 5 when we were talking about Seth, how Seth was made in the image of Adam, right? And Adam was made in the image of God. If we want our kids to live by God's word and follow his instruction, we have to do it ourselves. We have to model that for them because they're going to naturally imitate our behavior. So it's actually Abimelech who finds out that Isaac's wife, Rebekah, is not his sister, it's his wife. And Abimelech is the same king that back in chapter 20 took Sarah to be his own wife. Understandably, he's pretty upset that these Hebrews keep lying to him, right? Because, I mean, remember the plagues and the infertility that God sent on Pharaoh's house and Abimelech's house when they took Sarah, right? Abimelech is not happy with these guys, and he really shouldn't be. And remember that covenant with Abraham that Abimelech made in chapter 20. The premise of the covenant was, don't lie to me anymore. Like, don't lie to me and don't let your descendants lie to me, or else this covenant is null and void. And Isaac has violated that covenant. And Abimelech is stuck in this hard position because he needs to hold Isaac responsible for breaking the terms of the covenant, but also he knows that God is with him and he knows Abraham's reputation, right? And as a man of God. So it would be bad to kill Isaac, and Abimelech sees that, and so he declares that anyone who touches Isaac or Rebekah will be killed. And then later we also see that Isaac, who has already inherited everything that Abraham had, God is blessing him and giving him more riches, giving him more possessions in the land. And the Philistines start to take notice and they become jealous. The Philistines, out of jealousy, fill up those wells that Abraham dug and paid for back in chapter 21, right? They're jealous of God's gift to another person, right? And they're jealous of God's blessing on another person. Sounds a lot like Cain back in chapter 4. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are too powerful for us." And Isaac departed from there and camped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. So knowing there's this strife among his people, King Abimelech sends Isaac out. He says, this is too much, and we're just going to have to send you out. You can't live in our city anymore. And just like Abraham, Isaac is now camping in the land that will eventually go to his descendants. And while they're camping out there, Isaac ends up digging back out the wells that the Philistines had stopped up. But the problem is the Philistines keep coming back and taking them over and filling them up again, right? And so he names the first well Contention, and he names the second one Enmity, and then finally he's camped far enough away that the Philistines don't care anymore. He digs out another well, and he names that one Broad Places. We even see in verse 22 that Isaac says that now that there's room for them, they'll be fruitful in the land that God has called them to, right? Get it fruitful, just like being fruitful and multiply, just like those promises to Adam and to Noah and to Abraham, right? Isaac is taking that over in the land God has called them to, even though there's a famine. So here Isaac passes the test that God has set before him. He failed the first one, right? When he told everybody that Rebekah was his sister, but then he passes another one, just like Abraham, right? He passes some and he fails others, but ultimately he's faithful to God's promises. He trusts in God to provide for them, even when there's a famine, even when there's contention and enmity all around him. He is moving to where God calls him to, even in the midst of not knowing where food is going to be, and finds water, finds life in the broad places that God has called him to. And he went up from there to Beersheba. The Lord appeared to him the same night and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug him a well. So in response to Isaac passing God's test, God blesses him. He rewards him with all the blessings he's given Abraham before him, talking about blessing his descendants, right? And he says it's not for Isaac's own sake, it's because of Abraham. And Isaac responds with building an altar and calling upon the name of the Lord. That's things Abraham did in chapter 12. Things Noah did in chapter 8, right? He calls on the name of the Lord like Enoch and like Seth in chapter 5, right? He's marking all those boxes of trusting in God and following him and following his promises for humanity. And the story wraps up with Isaac making another covenant to Abimelech just like his father Abraham did, right? Abimelech, they come out, they kiss and they make up, and they have this big meal to celebrate. But notice that Isaac wouldn't have had the chance to put such evident faith in God if Abimelech hadn't kicked him out in the first place, right? But it all ended with ultimate faithfulness, reward, and blessing. Now, the story ends with a big red flag for what's to come. When Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. So we see Esau has married 2 wives, right? Remember, just like Lamech back in chapter 4, who married 2 wives, and he killed a man for striking him and a young boy for wounding him, right? We also are reminded of Abraham's 2 wives, Sarah and Hagar. That was the most shameful part of his story. That was the most grievous sin that he committed, right? And in addition, they're Hittite women. They don't worship the Lord God that the rest of Abraham's family is called to worship. So it says Isaac and Rebekah feel grief at this. Literally, it says they feel a bitterness of spirit. And it's going to pop back up in the stories to come. But that will have to wait until a later time. For right now, we see that Isaac has played out some of the highs and the lows of the story of his father in this chapter. And it reflects on how children are just images of their parents, right? Just like back in chapter 5. It speaks to that cycle of generational blessing and also generational trauma, right? And as a reminder that if parents do good, it's easier for the kids to do good. If parents do bad, it's easier for the kids to do bad because the kids are just going to reflect the behavior they see in their parents. But Isaac ultimately does prove himself to be faithful by making a different choice than his father, right? When there was a famine, Abraham fled and went to Egypt right away. Isaac, even though he stumbled at first, eventually went to the land God promised him, even in spite of the famine, and trusted in him and in the broad places God would provide for him. And God rewarded him with more blessing and more possessions and favor in the eyes of Abimelech, right? It was all according to God's plan. And so next time we're going to pick up with Isaac's sons, and see what they're going to do with all of this inherited blessing. For that, we'll have to come back tomorrow. But this has been 1189. Thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. Leave a comment below and see you tomorrow. God bless.